Chapter 1. The Delivery. The robot arrived in a box the size of a coffin, and Daniel Reyes signed for it as if it were a winning lottery ticket. The delivery driver stood on the cracked concrete path with a tablet in his hand, squinting at the house like he wasn't sure anyone lived there. Daniel didn't blame him. The lawn had gone to seed weeks ago, the porch light was missing a bulb, and a stack of yellowed flyers had accumulated against the front door. The place looked like a photograph of a memory, something that used to be cared for and no longer was. "That's a heavy one," the driver said, gesturing with his chin toward the crate on the lift gate. "What is it, a server rack?" "Something like that," Daniel said. He didn't say it was a robot. He didn't say it cost more than the used sedan in the driveway. He didn't say it was the last available credit line on a card he'd already nearly maxed out. He just pressed his thumb against the driver's screen, watched the signature render itself as a jagged line and said, "I'll take it from here." The driver helped him lower the crate onto a dolly, then left with a shrug and a rumble of diesel. Daniel stood alone in the heat and looked at the box. There was no picture on the side, only the pale blue logo of Meridian Robotics and the words Unit 7 stenciled in black. The cardboard smelled new and faintly chemical, like ozone and packing foam. He touched the side of the crate and felt the faint vibration of the machine inside. It was powered down dormant, but even dormant, it felt like standing next to a sleeping animal. He maneuvered the dolly up the front step, the wheels catching on a lip of broken concrete. The box swayed, Daniel's arms burned. He was 43 years old and his body had begun to fail him in small ways. A stiff back, a knee that clicked going upstairs, a fatigue that settled behind his eyes and never quite left. The robot in the box could probably lift 3 times his body weight without breathing hard. Inside, the house smelled like stale air and yesterday's dish soap. The living room was a quiet disaster. Unfolded laundry on the armchair, a tower of unopened bills on the coffee table, a television playing a cooking show nobody was watching. The blinds were half drawn, and the light that came through was thin and grey, like the whole room was underwater. Daniel parked the crate in the middle of the living room and stepped back. The box was taller than his daughter. For a long moment he just stood there, hands on his hips, listening to the house breathe. A door creaked upstairs, footsteps, soft and barefoot on the carpet. Chloe appeared at the top of the stairs. She was 10 years old, small for her age, with dark hair tied into a lopsided ponytail and a face that always seemed to be waiting for bad news. She wore a faded pink nightgown, even though it was 4 in the afternoon. In her arms she clutched a stuffed rabbit with one missing ear. "What is that?" she asked. Daniel forced a smile. "It's a helper." Chloe took a step back, half hidden behind the banister. "It looks like a coffin." "It's not a coffin." He tapped the side of the crate. "It's a machine. It's going to help around the house." "Is it alive?" "No, sweetheart, it's not alive." She didn't come downstairs. She just stood at the top, watching him with those wide, too serious eyes. Then, without another word, she turned and vanished back into the hallway. Daniel exhaled. The truth was, he didn't know what the thing in the box was. He had watched the marketing videos a dozen times. The sleek white shape gliding through a spotless kitchen, folding laundry, reading a bedtime story in a calm, synthetic voice. The people in those videos were always smiling, always relaxed. Their homes were bright and orderly. Their lives looked like a commercial for a future that should have already arrived. That was what Daniel wanted. Not the robot, exactly. The order. The front door opened behind him, and Lena came in from the garage. She was still wearing her scrubs from the night shift, faded blue, wrinkled at the elbows, the left pocket stained with what Daniel hoped was coffee. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face had that pale, hollow look it got after 12 hours on her feet. She was 41, but today she looked older. She stopped in the entryway and stared at the crate. "You actually bought it," she said. Daniel felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "We talked about it." "We talked about it the way we talk about everything," Lena said. She dropped her keys on the little table by the door. They landed with a hard clatter. "You decided?" And I said okay because I was too tired to fight. "You said it would help." "I said a dishwasher would help." She walked past him into the kitchen, not looking at the box. "I didn't say we should spend $12,000 on a robot." "It was $11,499, Daniel said quietly. She laughed, but there was no humour in it. She opened the refrigerator and stared inside at nothing. "Oh, well, $11,499, that changes everything." Daniel didn't answer. He stood with his hand on the crate, his thumb pressed against the edge of the cardboard. The house felt smaller with the two of them in it, the air thick with everything they weren't saying. The refrigerator door closed. Lena leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Where's Marcus?" "Upstairs." "Does he know?" "I told him." Lena made a small sound in the back of her throat. "I'm sure he's thrilled." She didn't wait for an answer. She walked past Daniel, past the crate, and headed upstairs. Her footsteps were heavy, the sound of a woman carrying too much for too long. Daniel stood alone in the living room for a long time. The living room was too small for the crate. Daniel had to move the coffee table against the wall, shove the laundry off the armchair, and push aside a stack of old magazines he'd been meaning to recycle. The carpet beneath the box was dented with the impressions of furniture that hadn't moved in years. He stood there, breathing hard, and surveyed the mess. There was a bill on the table from the hospital. He saw the logo, the red letters, the amount at the bottom that he'd stopped reading after the third notice. He turned it face down. "I need a knife," he said to no one. Marcus appeared in the doorway leading to the kitchen. He was 17, tall and angular, with his father's dark hair and his mother's sharp cheekbones. He wore a black hoodie and jeans and held his phone in one hand, not looking up from the screen. "Why?" Marcus asked. "To open the box." Marcus finally looked up. His eyes moved from the crate to Daniel and back again. "You really bought that thing?" "I really bought it." "Why?" Daniel felt the familiar rise of irritation. Marcus had a way of asking questions that sounded like accusations. "Because I'm tired of living like this," Daniel said. "Because someone in this house needs to fix things, and it clearly isn't going to be any of us." Marcus didn't answer. He just shook his head and walked into the kitchen. A moment later, he came back with a box cutter. Daniel took it and sliced through the tape on the top of the crate. The cardboard peeled back with a sound like tearing paper. Inside, the robot was encased in pale grey foam, its body wrapped in a thin layer of plastic film. Daniel pulled the plastic away. The Unit 7 was smaller than he'd expected. Not small, just human-sized, which, after all the marketing videos, with their low angles and dramatic lighting, felt almost modest. It stood upright in a foam cradle, its feet locked into a moulded base. It was 5'9", slender but dense. Its body was a shell of pearl grey polycarbonate, smooth and seamless except for the joints where black elastomer connected the limbs. Its hands were 5-fingered, surprisingly delicate, the fingers slightly curled as if it had fallen asleep. But it was the face that made Daniel pause. The head was a smooth teardrop shape, with no nose, no brow, no mouth in the human sense. Just two dark oval eyes set wide, and a perforated grille where a mouth might be. The grille curved upward at the edges, but it wasn't a smile. It was neutral. Still. Serene. Chloe had come halfway down the stairs again. She stood on the landing, clutching the banister. "Does it have a face?" she asked. "Sort of," Daniel said. "It looks like a robot," Marcus said flatly, "like a fake person." "It's not supposed to look like a person," Daniel said. "It's a tool." Marcus snorted. "Then why give it a face at all?" Daniel didn't have an answer. Lena appeared at the top of the stairs beside Chloe. She had changed out of her scrubs into a worn blue t-shirt and sweatpants. Her hair was still up, but she looked slightly more human. She rested a hand on Chloe's shoulder. "We're all going to stand here and watch you open a box?" she asked. I thought you'd want to see it, Daniel said. I've seen the website. But she didn't leave. None of them left. They stood at the edges of the room, watching as Daniel cut away the last of the foam and began to free the robot from its base. It took Daniel 20 minutes to get the robot out of the crate. The instruction manual, a thick, glossy booklet printed in 7 languages, told him to unlock the ankle clamps first, then the wrists, then the head bracket. Each clamp released with a soft, pneumatic hiss. The robot didn't move. It stood rigid, perfectly balanced, as still as a statue. Daniel stepped back and wiped his forehead. Okay, he said. Now we power it on. Do we have to? Chloe asked. We have to. Daniel flipped through the manual until he found the startup section. The instructions were simple. Locate the power port at the base of the skull. Hold for 3 seconds. Wait for the optical sensors to initialize. He stood behind the robot and reached up. The back of its head was smooth and cool to the touch. His fingers found a small, recessed button. He pressed it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the robot's fingers twitched. Chloe made a small noise, a gasp or maybe a whimper, and stepped behind her mother. Marcus took a half step back, his phone forgotten in his hand. Lena didn't move, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the banister. The robot's eyes lit up. They glowed a soft, warm white, then flickered as if adjusting to the light. Its head tilted slightly. 1 degree, maybe 2, and its body settled, the joints relaxing from their rigid shipping posture into something more natural. It looked around the room. Daniel stood very still. He could hear his own heartbeat. The manual was open in his hand to a page he was no longer reading. The robot's gaze passed over him, then over Marcus, then Lena and Chloe. It paused just for a moment on Chloe, then it straightened. When it spoke, the voice was exactly like the advertisements, calm, clear, and entirely without emotion. How may I optimize your household today? Nobody answered. The robot stood in the center of the living room, its blue throat light pulsing gently, waiting. Daniel looked at Lena. Lena looked at the robot. Marcus looked at the floor. Chloe looked at her stuffed rabbit, holding it tight against her chest. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower down the street. The robot waited, and Daniel realized with a sudden and unexpected chill that it could probably wait forever.